Let's begin with something that most men completely overlook, yet it is often the very first thing a woman responds to, long before any clever line, before any display of status, before any attempt to impress. Presence. Not what you say, not what you have, but how you feel to be around. Because attraction, especially instant attraction, is not a logical decision. It is an emotional and physiological response. It happens beneath conscious awareness in a space where words have very little influence. And in that space, what matters most is not performance, it is energy. Now, when we say energy, we're not talking about anything mystical. We're talking about emotional signals your nervous system is constantly broadcasting. Whether you are aware of it or not, you are always communicating something, certainty or doubt, calm or tension, self-trust or the need for validation. And people, especially women and social dynamics, are highly attuned to these signals. So when a man walks into a room, the question is not, is he trying to be attractive? The question is, does he feel grounded in himself, or is he subtly seeking approval from the environment? Because those two states create completely different experiences. A man who is internally grounded does not rush to prove himself. He does not over-adjust his behavior based on who is watching. He does not scan the room for validation. There is a certain stillness in how he carries himself. Not stiffness, stillness. A sense that he is comfortable being where he is without needing immediate external confirmation. And that feeling is incredibly powerful because psychologically, human beings are drawn to certainty. Not arrogance, not loud confidence, but quiet certainty. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that feels stable without effort. Now contrast that with neediness. Neediness is not just about obvious behaviors like chasing or over-texting. It is far more subtle than that. It shows up in micro adjustments, trying too hard to be liked, over-explaining, seeking reactions, changing tone based on approval. And while these behaviors may seem small, they communicate something deeper. I am not fully settled within myself. And the moment that signal is picked up, attraction weakens. Not because something is wrong with the person, but because the nervous system interprets instability as uncertainty. And uncertainty does not create immediate attraction, it creates hesitation. This is why presence matters more than performance, because performance is something you do. Presence is something you are. And people can feel the difference instantly. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. A grounded presence does not mean being distant or emotionally closed. It means being internally complete enough that your attention is not driven by a need to extract validation from others. You can engage, you can connect, you can show interest, but you are not dependent on the outcome. And that independence creates a subtle tension. Because when someone feels that you are not trying to win them over, it shifts the dynamic. Instead of feeling evaluated or pressured, they feel space. And in that space, curiosity begins to grow. Curiosity is one of the strongest drivers of attraction. When a woman senses that a man is comfortable in himself, not chasing approval, not over-investing too quickly, her mind naturally begins to ask, who is this person? Not because he is trying to stand out, but because he is not trying to fit in. And that distinction is everything. Now let's take this deeper. Most men think attraction is about adding something, more confidence, more humor, more effort. But in reality, instant attraction is often about removing something. Removing the subtle need to be liked, removing the internal pressure to impress, removing the habit of seeking external confirmation. What remains after that removal is authenticity. And authenticity, when combined with emotional stability, creates presence. A presence that feels calm but not passive. Engaged but not needy. Aware but not reactive. And that balance is rare. Because most people are either trying too hard or holding back too much. Very few are simply present without internal tension. And that is why it stands out immediately. Now, this kind of presence cannot be faked for long. It comes from internal alignment, from knowing that your value is not determined in that moment, in that interaction, by that person's reaction. It comes from a deeper sense of self-trust. And self-trust is felt before it is understood. So when you walk into a room or into a conversation, the goal is not to impress. The goal is to be grounded enough that you don't need to, because the moment you stop trying to extract validation from the interaction, you become someone who adds emotional stability to it. And people are naturally drawn to those who make them feel more stable, not more uncertain. So if we reduce it to its core, instant attraction is not triggered by what you say. It is triggered by how little you need from the moment. Because the man who is fully present without seeking approval, without forcing connection, without trying to prove his worth, becomes the one who is felt before he is even understood. And that is where attraction truly begins. Now, once that, Initial presence is established once you're no longer trying to force attraction and instead allowing it to emerge. Something very subtle, but incredibly powerful begins to matter. Eye contact, not in the exaggerated way most people think about it. Not staring, not trying to dominate the moment, not turning it into some kind of performance, but controlled, intentional eye contact, the kind that communicates clarity without pressure, because the eyes are one of the fastest channels of emotional communication we have. Before a single word is processed consciously, eye contact is already sending signals to the other person's nervous system, signals about confidence, about intent, about emotional stability. And here's the key. It's not about how long you look. It's about how you feel while you're looking. Most men either avoid eye contact too quickly or overcompensate by holding it in a way that feels forced. Both come from the same place, self-consciousness. One tries to escape the moment, the other tries to control it, but neither creates genuine attraction. Because attraction is not built on control, it's built on comfort. Now think about what happens when eye contact is natural and grounded. There is no rush to look away, but there is also no pressure to hold the gaze unnaturally. There is a rhythm to it. You look, you connect, you release. And within that rhythm, something important is communicated. I am comfortable enough to see you and comfortable enough to not force anything. That balance is what makes it powerful. Psychologically, eye contact does two things at the same time. It creates attention and it creates evaluation. When you look at someone, you are not just seeing them, you are signaling that they are being seen. And being seen activates awareness. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When a man holds eye contact just slightly longer than what is expected, but does so calmly without tension, it creates a subtle emotional shift. It introduces a moment of uncertainty, but not discomfort, a moment where the other person becomes aware of the connection, and that awareness often translates into attraction. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something real was felt. Now compare that to weak or inconsistent eye contact. When eye contact is constantly broken, rushed, or avoided, it signals internal hesitation. It suggests that the person is either unsure of themselves or uncomfortable with connection. And even if that's not the intention, the perception still affects attraction. Because again, the nervous system is not analyzing your intentions. It is responding to your signals, and eye contact is one of the clearest signals you send. Now let's go deeper. Controlled eye contact also communicates intent without words. It shows that you are present, aware, and engaged. But more importantly, it shows that you are not afraid of connection. And that lack of fear is often interpreted as confidence. Not loud confidence, not performative confidence, but quiet, grounded confidence. The kind that doesn't need to be explained. And this is where many men make a mistake. They try to use eye contact as a technique, as something to do in order to create attraction. But when it becomes mechanical, it loses its authenticity. Because again, people don't respond to the action, they respond to the energy behind the action. If your eye contact is coming from a place of trying to impress, it will feel different than if it comes from a place of calm presence. One feels like effort. The other feels like certainty, and certainty is what attracts. Now, there is also an element of restraint here that is important to understand. Holding eye contact does not mean locking in endlessly. In fact, part of what makes it effective is knowing when to release it. That release prevents pressure. It keeps the interaction fluid. It allows space for the other person to feel the connection without being overwhelmed by it. So it's not about intensity. It's about control. Control over your attention. Control over your presence. Control over your internal state. And when that control is there, even something as simple as eye contact becomes a powerful tool. Not because it is complex, but because it is rare to see it done with authenticity. Now think about the broader implication. In a world where most people are distracted, looking at their phones, scanning their surroundings, or mentally somewhere else, the ability to give someone your full, calm attention, even for a few seconds, becomes incredibly impactful. Because attention, when it is focused and intentional, feels valuable. And people are naturally drawn to those who make them feel valuable without saying a word. So if we reduce it to its core, eye contact is not about staring. It is about signaling through your gaze that you are present, aware, and unshaken by the moment. Because the man who can look without tension, without need, and without performance communicates more in silence than most ever do with words. And that silent communication is often where attraction begins, long before anything is ever said. Now, once presence is established and eye contact begins to create that initial spark of awareness, something counterintuitive starts to play a powerful role in attraction, not doing too much. In fact, one of the most overlooked dynamics in human psychology is this: attraction often grows in the space you don't fill. This is where subtle emotional detachment comes in, not as indifference, not as coldness, but as a controlled sense of non-neediness. A way of engaging without over-investing too quickly, because the moment a man becomes overly able, emotionally, verbally, or energetically, something shifts in the dynamic. The interaction loses tension. It becomes predictable too quickly. And when something becomes predictable before it has had time to develop, curiosity begins to fade. Now, let's be clear. This is not about playing games. It's not about pretending you don't care or artificially creating distance. That kind of behavior is easy to detect and it often backfires. What we are talking about is something far more grounded. It is the ability to remain emotionally centered even when you're interested, to engage without attaching your emotional state to the outcome, to allow the interaction to unfold without trying to accelerate it. And this creates something incredibly powerful, psychological space. Because attraction does not grow in pressure, it grows in space. When there is too much emotional intensity too quickly, the mind doesn't have time to process, to imagine, to become curious. Everything is already given. There is nothing left to discover. But when there is space, when a man shows interest, does not overwhelm with it, something different happens internally. The other person begins to lean in, not because they are being pulled, but because there is room to move. And that movement is what creates engagement. Now let's go deeper into why this works. The human mind is naturally drawn to what is not fully revealed. Not in a manipulative sense, but in a cognitive sense. When something is partially known, it creates an open loop in the brain, a question that has not been fully answered, and the brain seeks to close that loop. So when a man is present, attentive, but not overly expressive too soon, when he reveals himself gradually rather than all at once, it creates intrigue. Not confusion, but curiosity. And curiosity is one of the strongest emotional drivers of attraction. Now contrast this with overinvestment often shows up as trying too hard to connect, sharing too much too soon, seeking constant validation through reactions, or pushing for emotional closeness before it has naturally developed. And while the intention may be genuine, the effect is often the opposite of what is desired. Because instead of creating space, it creates pressure. Instead of inviting curiosity, it removes mystery. Instead of allowing attraction to grow, it tries to force it into existence. And forced attraction rarely lasts. Now, subtle emotional detachment does not mean you are distant. It means you are not dependent. You can enjoy the moment without needing it to become something more immediately. You can express interest without attaching urgency to it. You can walk away without feeling like you've lost something essential. And that internal independence changes how you are perceived. Because when someone senses that you are not trying to extract something from the interaction, that you are not seeking validation, approval, or immediate emotional return, it shifts the dynamic. You are no longer chasing the moment. You are allowing it. And that shift creates a form of quiet power. Now, here is something even deeper. When there is space and an interaction, the other person begins to project into that space. They begin to think about you after the interaction. They replay moments, they wonder, they imagine. And that internal engagement is what strengthens attraction over time. Because attraction is not just built in interaction, it is reinforced in absence. If everything is given immediately, there is nothing left to process later. But if there is a sense of incompleteness, not in a frustrating way, but in an intriguing way, the mind stays engaged, and engagement is what keeps attraction alive. Now, this requires discipline, because the natural instinct, especially when you feel a connection, is to move closer, to say more, to do more, to secure the outcome. But emotional control says something different. It says, let it build, let the interaction breathe, let the other person meet you halfway, let curiosity do its work. Because attraction that grows naturally is always stronger than attraction that is pushed. So if we reduce it to its essence, subtle emotional detachment is not about caring less. It is about needing less. And when you need less from the moment, you create more space for the moment to become something meaningful. Because in the end, people are not drawn to those who try to hold on to them too quickly. They are drawn to those who are comfortable enough to let the connection unfold and confident enough to know that if it's real, it doesn't need to be rushed. Now, once presence, eye contact, and emotional balance are in place, something even more fundamental begins to shape how you are perceived, something that often speaks louder than anything you say, your body language. Because before a single word is processed consciously, the body has already communicated a message. And that message is not interpreted logically, it is felt instantly, subconsciously, and often permanently. This is where many men underestimate the power of nonverbal signals. They focus on what to say, how to respond, what line to use. But in reality, the body is delivering the message long before the mind has a chance to analyze it. And the message your body sends is simple certainty or uncertainty. Now, certainty does not mean stiffness. It does not mean trying to look powerful or overly controlled. In fact, the more forced your posture becomes, the more it communicates tension. And tension is interpreted as insecurity, even if the intention is confidence. Real certainty looks different. It looks relaxed, it looks unhurried, it looks like someone who is comfortable taking up space without needing to justify it. Think about the difference between fast, reactive movements and slow, intentional ones. Fast move me, bend heads often signal urgency, nervousness, or the need to adjust. Slow movements signal control, awareness, and confidence, not because they are slow, but because they are deliberate. And that deliberateness is what people respond to. Now let's go deeper into why this matters. The human brain is constantly making rapid judgments about safety and stability. It is asking, often unconsciously, is this person in control of themselves? Not control over others, control over themselves. And your body language answers that question immediately. If your posture is closed, your movements are erratic, your gestures are excessive or inconsistent, it creates a subtle sense of unpredictability, not enough to consciously reject, but enough to prevent full attraction from forming. But when your posture is open, your movements are measured, and your gestures are minimal but intentional, something shifts. You begin to feel stable. And stability, once again, is a core driver of attraction. Now here's where it becomes even more interesting. Relaxed body language does not just signal confidence, it creates comfort in the other person, because people tend to mirror what they feel. If you are tense, they feel it. If you are rushed, they feel it. But if you are calm, grounded, and at ease, their nervous system begins to match that state. And when someone feels more relaxed around you than they do around others, they may not even fully understand why, but they will feel drawn to you because you become associated with ease. Now let's talk about space. How you occupy space matters, not in a dominant way, but in a natural way. Someone who is comfortable in themselves does not shrink unnecessarily, but they also don't overcompensate by trying to appear bigger. There is a balance, a quiet ownership of physical presence. And that ownership communicates something powerful. I am not here to prove myself. I am here because I belong. That feeling cannot be faked through posture alone. It comes from internal alignment. But once it is there, the body reflects it automatically. Now, gestures are another key element. Excessive or erratic gestures often signal a need to be understood quickly, to fill space, to push communication forward. But controlled gestures, fewer, slower, more intentional, signal clarity. They show that you are not rushing to be heard because you trust that what you say and how you say it will land, and that trusting yourself becomes visible. Now consider something simple like stillness. Most people are uncomfortable with stillness. They feel the need to move, adjust, react constantly. But someone who can remain still, even for a few seconds without tension, communicates something rare. They are not trying to escape the moment. They are fully inside it, and that level of presence expressed through the body is deeply attractive. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is uncommon. Now, all of this comes together into one core idea. Your body is either reinforcing your presence or contradicting it. You can say all the right things, but if your body signals uncertainty, the message becomes mixed. And the nervous system always trusts what it feels over what it hears. So alignment is key. When your internal state is calm, your body reflects calm. When your mind is steady, your movements become steady, and when that alignment is consistent, people begin to experience you as someone who is centered, not performing, not forcing, just centered. And that centeredness creates attraction without effort. So if we reduce it to its essence, body language is not about trying to look confident. It is about removing the behaviors that reveal tension and allowing your natural steadiness to show, because the man who moves with ease, who takes his time, who is comfa, rateable in stillness and unafraid of space, doesn't need to convince anyone of his confidence. It is already visible before he ever says a word. Now, once you've established presence, eye contact, emotional control, and body language, something else begins to elevate the interaction from neutral to memorable, emotional stimulation. And one of the most effective ways this happens is through what we can call playful tension. Now, this is where many men either overdo it or completely miss it. They either become too serious, trying to impress, trying to be perfect, trying to say the right thing, or they go too far in the other direction, becoming overly joking, unfocused, and lacking depth. But attraction does not grow in extremes. It grows in contrast. Playful tension is about creating a dynamic where there is both comfort and challenge, both ease and unpredictability. It is the subtle push and pull that keeps the interaction alive, without turning it into pressure or performance. Because here's the truth, people are not drawn to what is completely predictable. Predictability creates safety, yes, but without variation, it also creates boredom. And boredom is the silent killer of attraction. So what playful tension does is introduce variation into the interaction. It breaks the pattern just enough to create emotional engagement. Now let's understand this psychologically. The human brain is wired to respond to novelty. When something slightly unexpected happens, something that breaks the normal flow, it triggers attention. It pulls the mind into the present moment, and when that novelty is paired with a positive emotional tone, it creates attraction. This is why light teasing, subtle humor, and unexpected responses can be so effective when done correctly. Not to impress, not to dominate, but to create a shift in emotional rhythm. For example, instead of always agreeing, there is a moment of playful disagreement. Instead of responding in a completely predictable way, there is a slight twist, something that creates curiosity, a small emotional reaction, a moment of surprise. And in that moment, the interaction becomes alive. Now, here is the key. It must remain light. Playful tension is not about criticism. It is not about making someone feel uncomfortable or insecure. That destroys attraction. It is about creating a sense of fun unpredictability, where both people feel engaged rather than evaluated. Because the moment it feels like pressure, it stops being playful. And the moment it feels like performance, it stops being real. So the balance is everything. Now let's go deeper into the emotional impact. When an interaction has no variation, no emotional shifts, no moments of surprise, it becomes flat. Even if everything is nice, it lacks energy. And without energy, attraction cannot grow. But when there is playful tension, something different happens. The emotional experience becomes dynamic. There are small highs and lows, small shifts in tone, moments of curiosity followed by moments of comfort. And that variation creates memorability because people don't remember flat interactions. They remember how they felt. And feeling something, even something subtle, is what creates attachment. Now, here's something even more important. Playful tension also communicates confidence. Because to create that kind of dynamic, you have to be comfortable enough to not always play it safe. You have to be willing to step slightly outside the predictable script. And that willingness signals that you are not afraid of the interaction. You are participating in it, not cautiously observing it. And that participation is what makes you stand out. But again, it must be grounded. If it becomes excessive, too many jokes, too much teasing, too much unpredictability, it loses its effect. It becomes noise instead of signal. So the goal is not constant stimulation. It is strategic variation, a moment of playfulness, then calm. Then connection, then a slight shift again. That rhythm is what keeps attention without overwhelming it. Now let's connect this back to everything we've talked about. Presence creates the foundation. Eye contact creates awareness. Emotional control creates space. Body language reinforces stability, and playful tension brings it all to life. It adds movement to stillness, energy to calm, personality to presence, and that combination is what transforms an interaction from something forgettable into something engaging. Because attraction is not just about feeling safe, it is about feeling something. And playful tension is what introduces that something without turning it into chaos. So if we reduce it to its essence, playful tension is not about trying to be funny or impressive. It is about creating small moments of emotional contrast that keep the interaction alive. Because in the end, people don't become drawn to those who are perfectly predictable. They become drawn to those who make them feel engaged, curious, and slightly excited without ever feeling uncomfortable. And the man who understands that balance doesn't just hold attention. He becomes the experience people remember long after the interaction ends. Now, after everything we've explored, presence, eye contact, emotional control, body language, and playful tension, we arrive at something that appears simple on the surface, but in reality, it separates those who are merely noticed from those who are remembered. How you speak. Not how much you say, but how intentionally you say it, because one of the clearest signals of confidence is not verbal dominance. It is verbal precision. Most people, when they feel pressure in a conversation, respond by doing more. More talking, more explaining, more filling of silence. They believe that if they can just keep the interaction going, keep the words flowing, they can maintain interest. But what actually happens is the opposite. Excessive talking often reveals internal tension. It signals a need to hold the moment together, to prevent silence, to avoid uncertainty. And that need subtly communicates insecurity, not because the words are wrong, but because the energy behind them feels rushed. Now contrast that with someone who speaks less, but with clarity. Someone who is not in a hurry to respond. Someone who allows a moment to breathe before answering. someone who chooses words carefully instead of reacting immediately. That kind of communication creates weight because when words are not constant, they become valuable. And when they are delivered with intention, they become memorable. Now let's understand the psychology behind this. The human mind assigns value based on scarcity and clarity. When something is abundant and unfiltered, it becomes easy to ignore. But when something is measured and deliberate, it naturally commands attention. So when a man speaks in a way that is calm, paced, and precise, it signals something very important. He is not trying to prove himself through quantity. He trusts the impact of what he says, and that trust becomes visible. Now, this does not mean being silent or withdrawn. It means being selective. It means understanding that not every moment requires a response. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every thought needs to be spoken out loud. And this restraint creates a very different dynamic in conversation. Because when you are not rushing to speak, you begin to listen more deeply. You begin to observe more clearly. And your responses become more aligned, more relevant, more impactful. Instead of reacting, you are responding. And that difference is felt immediately. Now here is where it becomes even more powerful. Pauses. Most people are uncomfortable with pauses. They see them as awkward gaps, something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. But in reality, pauses are one of the strongest tools in communication. A pause creates anticipation. It gives weight to what was just said. It allows the other person to process, to feel, to stay engaged. And when a pause is held without tension, without the need to rush, it communicates confidence because it shows that you are not afraid of silence. And the ability to be comfortable in silence is one of the clearest indicators of internal stability. Now let's go deeper into tone. Tone often matters more than words. You can say the same sentence in two different tones and create completely different emotional reactions. A rushed tone creates pressure. A calm one creates ease. A controlled tone creates authority. And when your tone is aligned with your presence, steady, relaxed, intentional, it reinforces everything you've already communicated non-verbally. It becomes congruent. And congruence is what builds trust. Because when your words, your tone, and your body all send the same message, there is no confusion. And where there is no confusion, there is clarity. And where there is clarity, attraction can grow without resistance. Now consider something else. When you speak less, the other person naturally speaks more. And when they speak more, they become more invested in the interaction. Not because you are doing something to them, but because you are creating space for them to express themselves. And people feel connected to those they can express themselves around. So by saying less, you are not reducing the interaction. You are deepening it. You are allowing it to become more balanced, more natural, more engaging. Now this requires discipline. Because the instinct to fill silence, to impress, to keep talking, it's strong. But the man who learns to control that instinct gains something far more powerful than conversational dominance. He gains conversational influence, because influence does not come from speaking the most. It comes from speaking in a way that makes people listen. So if we reduce it to its essence, speaking less is not about saying less for the sake of it. It is about removing the unnecessary so that what remains carries weight. Because the man who chooses his words carefully, who is not afraid of silence, who speaks with clarity instead of urgency, does not need to chase attention. He naturally holds it. And in the end, people don't remember how much you said. They remember how what you said made them feel and how effortlessly you made them listen.